Imagine waking in a world where no one has ever seen a coin or counted a fortune. There are no banks, no wallets, and no price tags. Yet some people are admired, respected, and envied because they possess something others do not. A fertile field, a healthy herd, a storehouse full of grain, or the loyalty of an entire village. Long before money existed, wealth already shaped human lives. But where did it begin? When did people first decide that one thing was more valuable than another? Why have generations spent thousands of years chasing wealth, building kingdoms, crossing oceans, and risking everything in search of prosperity? And how did simple possessions eventually become gold, coins, banks, companies, and the financial world we know today? If you enjoy peaceful journeys through history, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating relaxing documentaries to help you unwind, learn something new, and gently drift off to sleep. Now, dim the lights, settle into a comfortable position, and let your imagination travel back to the very beginning. This is the true story of wealth. For most of human history, wealth did not exist, not because people lacked valuable things, but because the very idea of wealth had not yet taken shape. There were no coins to collect, no fortunes to inherit, and no markets where prices determined value. Nearly 20,000 years ago, small groups of hunter-gatherers moved across forests, rivers, and open plains, carrying only what they needed to survive. Every possession had a clear purpose. A sharp stone blade meant successful hunting. A warm animal skin meant protection through a harsh winter. A woven basket allowed a family to gather enough food for another day. Nothing was owned simply to display status or accumulate riches. Survival was the measure of success, and cooperation often mattered more than possession. Life depended on sharing knowledge, food, and responsibility. A successful hunter who returned with more meat than his family could eat rarely kept it for himself. Instead, the food was shared throughout the group, strengthening trust and ensuring that everyone would survive difficult seasons together. In return, others would do the same when fortune favored them. This constant exchange created relationships built on cooperation rather than competition. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have found that generosity often brought greater respect than ownership itself. Knowledge could also become an invisible form of prosperity. The person who remembered where fresh water remained during a long drought, recognized the safest migration routes, or understood which plants could heal illness, possessed something far more valuable than any physical object. Experience, skill, and trust quietly shaped the earliest human communities long before anyone imagined money. Yet even in this world of cooperation, people slowly began noticing something that would eventually change history. Certain objects were simply harder to obtain than others. Obsidian, the smooth, volcanic glass, prized for its razor-sharp edge, existed only in a few regions of the world. Beautiful seashells appeared hundreds of kilometers inland, carried there through generations of exchange. Rare animal teeth became ornaments. Carefully crafted tools passed from one family to another because replacing them required exceptional skill. Archaeologists continue to discover these objects far from their places of origin, revealing that early communities were already connected through surprisingly extensive exchange networks. Nobody considered themselves wealthy. No one was counting possessions or measuring personal fortunes. But people were beginning to recognize that some objects require greater effort, greater skill, or greater distance to obtain. Without realizing it, they were learning one of humanity's most enduring lessons. Not everything held the same value. This quiet realization did not transform the world overnight. It spread gradually across thousands of years, almost unnoticed, carried from one generation to the next through daily life rather than grand inventions or powerful kings. At first, it was simply practical. Some tools lasted longer, some materials worked better, some objects were admired because they were rare. But as these ideas slowly took root, human relationships with possessions also began to change. For the first time, value was becoming something that existed not only in usefulness, but also in human perception. That small shift may have seemed insignificant to the people living through it, yet it marked the beginning of a journey that would eventually reshape civilizations, inspire exploration, build kingdoms, and transform the entire course of history. The slow transformation did not happen because someone invented wealth, nor because a great ruler declared certain possessions more valuable than others. It began through countless ordinary decisions repeated over thousands of years. Every successful hunt, every carefully crafted tool, and every rare object exchanged between neighboring communities quietly added another piece to a much larger story. As the Ice Age gradually came to an end around 12,000 years ago, Earth's climate became warmer and more stable. Forests expanded, rivers settled into predictable courses, and many wild plants flourished across fertile landscapes. These environmental changes encouraged some human communities to remain in the same places for longer periods instead of constantly following migrating animals. At first, these seasonal camps were temporary, but each year people returned to the same valleys, riverbanks, and open plains where food was abundant. They began noticing something remarkable. Seeds dropped onto the ground often grew into new plants. Animals returned to familiar grazing areas. Nature itself followed patterns that could be observed, remembered, and eventually influenced. Instead of simply collecting what the land provided, people slowly learned how to shape the landscape around them. Wild wheat and barley were carefully tended. Goats and sheep that had once been hunted became animals that could be protected, bred, and managed. This quiet revolution unfolded over many generations. No single person witnessed the entire transformation, yet together, these countless small discoveries permanently changed humanity's relationship with survival. For the first time, people could produce more food than they immediately needed. This surplus was unlike anything earlier generations had ever experienced. Extra grain could remain inside storage pits long after the harvest ended. Herds could continue growing year after year. Families no longer depended entirely on the success of tomorrow's hunt, because part of next season's survival already waited inside their granaries. Surplus brought something humanity had rarely known before: security. But security also introduced entirely new questions. Who owned the stored grain? Who decided how it would be shared? Who protected it from theft, animals, or neighboring groups? These questions had never mattered when possessions were few and communities moved constantly across the landscape. Permanent settlements changed everything. Houses became larger. Storage buildings became stronger. Boundaries slowly appeared between one family's fields and another's. Archaeological discoveries from some of the world's earliest farming villages reveal houses with dedicated storage rooms filled with grain, tools, and household goods. These were not treasures in the modern sense, yet they represented something revolutionary. They allowed families to think beyond tomorrow. They could prepare for difficult winters, poor harvests, or growing populations. Wealth was beginning to acquire a new meaning. It was no longer measured only by what helped someone survive today, but also by what could protect tomorrow. As villages expanded, another important change quietly emerged. Not everyone needed to spend every day searching for food. Some people became skilled potters. Others specialized in making stronger tools, weaving cloth, or constructing homes. Their expertise could be exchanged for food produced by farming families. Slowly, labor itself gained value alongside physical possessions. Human knowledge became something that could be traded, appreciated, and relied upon. Prosperity was becoming more complex with every generation. Looking back today, it may seem inevitable that wealth would eventually lead to money, markets, and powerful economies. Yet the people living through this transformation could not have imagined such a future. They were simply trying to make life a little safer, a little more predictable, and a little more comfortable for their families. Without realizing it, however, they had taken another decisive step. Wealth was no longer just the recognition that some things were more valuable than others. It had become the ability to preserve that value, protect it, and pass it forward into the future. That simple idea would soon connect distant communities, giving birth to trade on a scale the world had never seen before. As villages continued to grow, another quiet transformation began to unfold. Families no longer produced everything they needed by themselves. A farmer with abundant grain might have little skill in making pottery. A talented potter could create beautiful storage jars but needed food to feed a growing family. A skilled stoneworker crafted stronger tools than anyone else. It still depended on others for clothing, shelter, or livestock. Slowly, communities became interconnected through specialization. Instead of every household doing a little of everything, people began doing a few things exceptionally well. This simple change made life more efficient, but it also created a new challenge. How could two people exchange goods fairly when each believed their own work was more valuable? There was no universal answer. Every exchange required discussion, trust, and careful judgment. One basket of grain might be enough to obtain a clay pot during a successful harvest, but after a season of drought, that same basket could become far more valuable. Value was constantly changing because it depended on circumstances rather than fixed prices. Trade became an exercise in human judgment long before it became an economic system. As settlements expanded into towns, trade reached beyond neighboring villages. Rivers became natural highways connecting distant communities. Small boats carried grain downstream, while returning with stone, timber, salt, and minerals unavailable in fertile farming regions. Across mountains and deserts, traders slowly established routes linking people who spoke different languages and followed different traditions. Archaeologists have discovered obsidian from Anatolia in settlements hundreds of kilometers away. Baltic amber buried in Bronze Age graves far to the south, and seashells carried deep into inland regions where the ocean had never been seen. These discoveries reveal that trade networks stretched across remarkable distances thousands of years before roads, maps, or written contracts existed. Every journey required courage. Merchants crossed dangerous rivers, climbed mountain passes, and traveled through unfamiliar territories, carrying goods whose value depended entirely on whether someone else desired them. Among all the goods exchanged during these early centuries, one resource quietly became essential to nearly every civilization: salt. Today, it sits unnoticed on dining tables around the world, but in ancient times, it was one of the most precious commodities imaginable. Salt preserved meat and fish for months, making long journeys and difficult winters far easier to survive. Communities located near natural salt deposits possessed something that many others desperately needed. Entire trade routes developed around this single mineral. In some regions, salt became so valuable that it was exchanged almost like money. Similar stories surrounded copper, tin, jade, lapis lazuli, incense, and rare dyes. None of these objects held value because of laws or governments. They became valuable because human needs and desires gave them importance. Trade also transformed the way people thought about distant places. A village was no longer limited to the resources found nearby. Through exchange, someone living hundreds of kilometers away could influence daily life without ever meeting the people who benefited from their work. New tools spread across continents. Farming techniques traveled alongside merchants. Artistic styles mixed between cultures. Even ideas moved with trade. Prosperity was no longer created only by what a community produced itself, but also by what it could obtain from others. Wealth was becoming something larger than individual families or villages. It was beginning to connect entire regions. Yet despite these remarkable advances, every transaction still depended on negotiation. A shepherd might believe that one healthy sheep deserved 10 baskets of grain, while the farmer offering the grain believed 5 baskets were more than enough. There was no common standard that everyone accepted. As trade expanded, this problem appeared again and again. The larger the network became, the more difficult it was to determine fair value between completely different goods. Humanity had learned how to create wealth, protect wealth, and exchange wealth across vast distances. The next challenge would be finding a way to measure it. A discovery that would forever change the course of civilization. For thousands of years, trade connected villages, kingdoms, and entire civilizations without a single coin changing hands. People had already learned how to produce wealth, store wealth, and exchange wealth. Yet one fundamental problem refused to disappear. Value was different for everyone. A shepherd might believe his healthiest sheep was worth an entire season's harvest, while a farmer argued that several sacks of grain were more than enough. A merchant carrying rare spices across the desert expected far greater rewards than someone selling clay pots made only a few kilometers away. Every transaction required negotiation, patience, and trust. As trade networks grew larger, these conversations became longer and increasingly complicated. Human societies had discovered how to create prosperity, but they still lacked a simple way to measure it. The limitations of barter became more obvious with every generation. Imagine arriving at a marketplace carrying beautiful woven cloth, hoping to exchange it for fresh fish. The fisherman may not need cloth that day. Instead, he wants grain. The farmer with grain needs copper tools. The blacksmith making those tools is looking for livestock. Even when everyone possessed something valuable, trade could fail simply because their needs did not match at the same moment. Economists today call this the double coincidence of wants. but the people living through it simply experienced frustration. A growing economy required something that everyone would be willing to accept, even if they did not immediately need the goods being offered. Long before coins appeared, many civilizations experimented with objects that could serve this purpose. In different parts of the world, people used cattle, salt, tea, cacao beans, cowrie shells, bronze tools, and even carefully woven cloth as common mediums of exchange. Each reflected the environment and culture of the people who used it. Cowrie shells traveled thousands of kilometers across Africa and Asia because they were durable, recognizable, and difficult to counterfeit. Salt became so valuable in many societies that entire trade routes depended upon it, while in some regions it was accepted almost as readily as food itself. Yet every one of these early forms of money shared the same weakness. Some could spoil, others were difficult to transport, and many varied greatly in size or quality. None provided a truly universal standard. Around the 7th century BCE, in the Kingdom of Lydia in western Anatolia, an extraordinary solution emerged. Instead of exchanging goods directly or relying upon objects whose value constantly changed, craftsmen began producing small pieces of electrum, a naturally occurring mixture of gold and silver, stamped with official symbols guaranteeing their weight and purity. For the first time, people no longer needed to test every transaction individually. Trust was built directly into the object itself. A coin represented not only precious metal, but also the authority standing behind it. Historians often describe these Lydian coins as the world's first widely recognized minted currency. Their appearance transformed commerce because value could now be counted, compared, stored, and transported with unprecedented simplicity. The idea spread remarkably fast. The Greeks refined coinage, producing beautifully crafted silver coins that circulated throughout the Mediterranean. The Persian Empire adopted standardized currencies to help govern enormous territories stretching across 3 continents. Later, Rome produced vast quantities of coins that reached nearly every corner of its empire, allowing soldiers, merchants, craftsmen, and ordinary citizens to participate in increasingly sophisticated economies. Markets became larger because buyers and sellers no longer needed perfect exchanges. Prices slowly replaced endless negotiation. Wealth could be accumulated more easily than ever before. Yet perhaps the most important lesson is also the simplest. Money did not create wealth. Wheat fed people long before coins existed. Skilled craftsmen created beautiful tools without a single piece of silver. Farmers harvested fertile fields, shepherds raised healthy flocks, and merchants crossed dangerous mountains centuries before the first mint opened its doors. Wealth already existed because people produced things of value. Money merely gave humanity a common language for measuring, exchanging, and preserving that value. It solved one of history's greatest practical problems. But the story of wealth had begun long before the first coin was ever struck. That invention would soon make another remarkable idea possible: institutions capable of protecting wealth itself, lending it to others, and allowing it to grow across generations. The invention of money solved one of humanity's greatest challenges, but it also created an entirely new opportunity. For the first time, wealth could be stored in a form that was smaller, easier to transport, and more durable than sacks of grain or herds of livestock. A farmer no longer needed to keep every harvest inside a granary. A merchant no longer had to carry valuable cargo everywhere he traveled. Coins could preserve value long after a harvest had ended or a journey was complete. Yet this new convenience introduced another question that previous generations had rarely considered. If wealth could be stored, could it also become larger without producing more goods? This simple idea would gradually transform economies across the ancient world. Long before modern banks existed, the earliest civilizations had already begun searching for ways to protect accumulated wealth and make it useful, even while its owner was absent. The answer appeared in places few people today would expect. In ancient Mesopotamia, the first institutions that performed many banking functions were not commercial buildings, but temples. Massive temple complexes stood at the center of cities, such as Ur, Uruk, and Babylon. Beyond their religious importance, these temples were trusted by the community because they possessed strong walls, permanent administration, and educated scribes capable of keeping detailed records. Farmers deposited grain after successful harvests. Merchants stored silver before setting out on dangerous trading expeditions. Valuable goods could remain inside temple storehouses under organized supervision instead of being left unprotected inside private homes. Clay tablets covered with cuneiform writing recorded deposits, repayments, agreements, and obligations with remarkable precision. Many of these tablets still survive today, allowing historians to reconstruct economic activities that took place nearly 4,000 years ago. Over time, the role of these institutions expanded. Wealth no longer remained motionless inside storage rooms. A portion of the grain or silver deposited by one person could be lent to another who needed resources for farming, trade, or business. After a successful harvest or profitable journey, the borrower returned the original amount together with an additional payment. Today, we call this interest. But to ancient societies, it was simply compensation for using someone else's resources. One person's stored wealth could now help another person create new wealth. This was one of the most important economic discoveries in human history. Wealth no longer depended only on possession. It could actively participate in producing future prosperity. Not every loan ended successfully. Droughts destroyed harvests. Merchant ships disappeared during storms. Caravans were attacked before reaching distant cities. Borrowers sometimes failed to repay what they owed. Because of these uncertainties, ancient legal systems gradually developed rules governing contracts, collateral, repayment schedules, and responsibility. The famous Code of Hammurabi, written around 1750 BCE, contains numerous laws regulating loans, debts, agricultural agreements, and commercial partnerships. These laws demonstrate that financial relationships had already become an essential part of everyday life. As economies became more sophisticated, trust became just as valuable as silver itself. A merchant known for honest dealings could obtain better opportunities than someone with greater possessions, but a poor reputation. Written agreements reduced uncertainty, while standardized laws encouraged strangers to cooperate with one another. Wealth was becoming increasingly dependent upon confidence rather than physical objects alone. The invisible belief that agreements would be honored allowed trade and lending to expand far beyond family relationships. Looking back, these developments marked another quiet turning point in the long story of wealth. The first farmers had learned to create surplus. Merchants had connected civilizations through trade. Coins had made value easier to measure. Now humanity had discovered that wealth could do something entirely new. It could be protected, invested, and put to work. Money itself was no longer the destination. It had become a tool capable of creating even greater prosperity, laying the foundation for the powerful banking families, global companies, and financial systems that would eventually reshape the entire world. As wealth became something that could be stored, protected, and multiplied, it also began to change societies in ways that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. For thousands of years, prosperity had been measured by fertile fields, healthy livestock, or full granaries. Now wealth could accumulate far beyond the needs of survival. It could finance expeditions, employ workers, purchase land, and influence governments. For the first time in history, extraordinary fortunes began to appear. These fortunes did not emerge overnight. They were built slowly through trade, agriculture, taxation, mining, and careful management over many generations. Some belonged to kings, others to powerful merchants, while many were controlled by temples and governments. Wealth was no longer simply something a family possessed. It was becoming a force capable of shaping entire civilizations. Among the most famous wealthy rulers of the ancient world was Croesus, the king of Lydia, who ruled during the 6th century BCE. His kingdom occupied a strategic position between east and west, allowing merchants traveling across Anatolia to pass through Lydian territory. Taxes collected from this flourishing trade, combined with the region's rich natural resources, filled the royal treasury with enormous quantities of gold and silver. Croesus became so famous for his immense fortune that even today expressions such as "rich as Croesus" continue to describe extraordinary wealth. Ancient Greek historians admired his prosperity almost as much as his political influence. Yet, Croesus represented something larger than personal success. His reign demonstrated that wealth could strengthen an entire kingdom. Roads were improved, cities expanded, trade increased, and standardized coinage spread throughout the region. Money itself became more trusted because the state guaranteed its value. The prosperity of Lydia encouraged neighboring civilizations to adopt similar systems, helping coins spread rapidly across the ancient Mediterranean. Elsewhere, wealth took different forms. In Egypt, enormous state resources supported the construction of temples, irrigation systems, and monumental architecture that required decades of coordinated labor. In Persia, royal treasuries collected tribute from provinces stretching across 3 continents, financing roads, armies, and one of history's largest administrative systems. Later, Rome developed perhaps the most sophisticated economy of the ancient world. Vast agricultural estates produced food on an unprecedented scale, while trade ships carried olive oil, wine, grain, marble, spices, silk, and precious metals throughout the empire. Wealth flowed continuously between Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Successful Roman merchants built fortunes large enough to rival those of senators, while influential families invested in shipping, mining, construction, and land. Entire industries emerged around supplying the growing needs of the empire. Yet despite these remarkable fortunes, the richest individuals rarely kept their wealth locked away. Great fortunes often remained active, constantly moving through the economy. Wealth financed ships that crossed dangerous seas, caravans that disappeared into distant deserts, workshops employing hundreds of craftsmen, and farms producing food for expanding cities. Every successful investment created opportunities for countless other people. Of course, great wealth also brought enormous risks. A failed harvest, a shipwreck, political instability, or war could erase fortunes that had taken decades to build. Prosperity and uncertainty always traveled together. As fortunes grew larger, another important idea quietly emerged. Wealth was becoming a symbol of status as much as security. Magnificent homes, elaborate clothing, public monuments, generous donations to temples, and sponsorship of public festivals all demonstrated influence within society. Riches were no longer valued only for what they could buy. They shaped reputation, political power, and social standing. Across many civilizations, people increasingly judged success by visible signs of prosperity. The meaning of wealth was expanding beyond practical survival into something deeply connected with prestige and identity. Looking back across the ancient world, it becomes clear that these extraordinary fortunes were never created by gold alone. Gold merely reflected something that already existed. Behind every royal treasury stood fertile farmland, skilled craftsmen, successful merchants, organized governments, reliable trade routes, and thousands of ordinary people whose daily work sustained entire economies. Wealth continued to evolve because civilization itself continued to evolve. And as prosperity reached levels never before imagined, humanity would soon discover an even more powerful idea than simply becoming rich. People would learn how to combine their wealth, share risks. By the end of the Middle Ages, trade had expanded far beyond local markets. Merchant ships crossed vast oceans. Caravans traveled across continents. And European cities demanded spices, silk, porcelain, precious metals, and countless other goods arriving from distant lands. Every successful voyage promised enormous profits, but every expedition carried tremendous risks. Storms could sink entire fleets, pirates threatened valuable cargo, wars closed important trade routes, and disease often spread through busy ports. Financing such dangerous journeys became increasingly difficult. Even wealthy merchants hesitated to risk their entire fortune on a single expedition. Humanity had already learned how to create wealth, protect wealth, and lend wealth. Now a new question emerged. Could several people combine their wealth to pursue opportunities that no individual could afford alone? The answer appeared gradually through a new form of partnership. Instead of one merchant paying for an entire voyage, several investors contributed smaller amounts of money. If the expedition succeeded, each received a share of the profits. If it failed, the losses were shared as well. This simple idea transformed commerce. Wealth was no longer limited by the fortune of one individual. By working together, merchants could finance larger ships, purchase greater quantities of goods, and reach markets that had previously seemed impossible. This concept reached a historic milestone in 1602 with the creation of the Dutch East India Company, better known as the VOC. Historians widely recognize it as the world's first multinational joint stock company. Investors no longer financed only one voyage. Instead, they purchased shares representing partial ownership of the company itself. Their investment remained active as the company continued operating year after year. For the first time, ownership could be divided into small pieces and shared among hundreds of people. Wealth itself had become something that could be collectively owned. The scale of the VOC astonished the world. Hundreds of ships sailed under its flag, transporting spices, tea, textiles, porcelain, and other valuable goods between Europe and Asia. The company established ports, warehouses, trading posts, and offices across several continents. It employed thousands of sailors, merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, and administrators. In some regions, it even negotiated treaties and governed overseas territories. A business organization had become powerful enough to rival entire kingdoms. The company's success inspired many others. England established its own East India Company, while similar corporations soon financed exploration, mining, manufacturing, and global trade. International commerce expanded faster than ever before. Products that had once been considered unimaginable luxuries gradually became available in distant markets, connecting societies separated by thousands of kilometers. Yet this remarkable success also carried a darker reality. Many of these companies benefited from colonial expansion, unequal trade, and the exploitation of local populations. Extraordinary wealth for some often came at a heavy cost for others. The history of prosperity has always contained both innovation and injustice. Despite these contradictions, one achievement changed the world forever. Wealth no longer depended solely on individual fortunes or family inheritance. Thousands of strangers could now invest together in the same enterprise, sharing both opportunity and risk. This new way of thinking laid the foundation for modern corporations and transformed wealth into something more dynamic than ever before. Soon, ownership itself would become something people could buy and sell every day, giving birth to one of history's most influential financial institutions. The stock exchange. The invention of the joint stock company solved one important problem. Large businesses could now raise enormous amounts of money by allowing many people to become partial owners. Yet another challenge soon appeared. What happened if an investor wanted their money back before the company completed its work? In the past, an investment often remained tied to a single voyage or business for many years. There was usually no simple way to sell that ownership to someone else. As more people invested in growing companies, the need for a marketplace where ownership itself could be exchanged became increasingly obvious. That marketplace appeared in the Dutch Republic during the early 17th century. In Amsterdam, investors began gathering to buy and sell shares of the Dutch East India Company. Instead of waiting years for ships to return from Asia, shareholders could now sell their ownership whenever they wished. At the same time, new investors could purchase those shares without waiting for the company to launch another expedition. Ownership had become something that could move from one person to another almost as easily as coins changed hands. This innovation changed the meaning of wealth once again. Until then, prosperity usually depended on physical possessions such as land, livestock, buildings, precious metals, or valuable goods. Now, a person could own part of a business without ever seeing its ships or visiting its warehouses. Wealth was becoming increasingly invisible. A simple piece of paper representing ownership could be worth more than a chest filled with gold. Confidence, reputation, and expectations about the future became just as important as the assets themselves. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange soon became one of the busiest financial centers in the world. Merchants, investors, and traders gathered every day, discussing news arriving from distant ports. The success or failure of a voyage could influence the value of company shares long before the ships returned home. Prices rose when people believed a company would prosper and fell when uncertainty spread. For the first time, markets reflected not only present wealth, but also future expectations. Optimism and fear became powerful economic forces. Other nations quickly recognized the advantages of this new system. Stock exchanges gradually appeared in London, Paris, and other growing commercial centers. As international trade expanded during the 18th and 19th centuries, these financial markets helped fund railways, factories, canals, mines, and industries that transformed the modern world. Many of history's greatest engineering projects would have been impossible without thousands of investors, contributing relatively small amounts of capital toward a shared goal. Of course, the stock market also revealed another side of human nature. Excitement could become speculation, and confidence could turn into panic almost overnight. History records periods when investors rushed to buy shares, simply because prices were rising, only to watch fortunes disappear when markets suddenly collapsed. These financial bubbles reminded people that wealth had always depended on trust. When trust grew stronger, economies expanded. When it disappeared, even the greatest fortunes could vanish with surprising speed. Looking back, the stock exchange represented far more than a place where shares were bought and sold. It demonstrated that wealth was no longer limited by what one person could build or own alone. Millions of people could now participate in creating prosperity together, each contributing a small part to something much larger than themselves. From the first rare obsidian stone to the world's first stock exchange, the journey of wealth had been one of constant transformation. Yet its greatest expansion was still ahead. A new age of machines, factories, and innovation would soon multiply wealth on a scale humanity had never witnessed before. For thousands of years, the growth of wealth had been slow. A successful harvest could increase a family's prosperity. A profitable trading voyage might enrich a merchant. A wise investment could strengthen a kingdom. But these changes usually happened over years or even generations. Then, during the late 18th century, history reached another turning point. A series of inventions transformed the way people produced goods, and for the first time, wealth began growing at a speed the world had never experienced before. This period became known as the Industrial Revolution. The transformation began in Britain, where inventors improved machines capable of producing textiles far faster than skilled craftsmen working by hand. Water wheels and later, powerful steam engines supplied energy that no human or animal could match. Workshops gradually expanded into factories filled with spinning machines, mechanical looms, and steam-powered equipment operating day and night. A single factory could produce more cloth in 1 week than an entire village had once created in several months. Productivity increased dramatically, while the cost of manufacturing steadily declined. As factories multiplied, cities changed almost overnight. Small towns grew into crowded industrial centers as thousands of people left the countryside searching for steady employment. Railways connected distant regions, allowing raw materials and finished products to travel faster than ever before. Steamships shortened international trade routes, carrying enormous quantities of goods across oceans with greater speed and reliability. Coal, iron, and later steel became the foundations of industrial economies, while new technologies continuously improved production. Wealth was no longer created only by fertile land or successful trade. Machines themselves had become powerful creators of prosperity. Entire industries emerged around these new technologies. Textile mills were followed by ironworks, coal mines, railroads, shipbuilding, and heavy manufacturing. Entrepreneurs who successfully organized these businesses accumulated fortunes unlike anything seen in previous centuries. Families such as the Rothschilds expanded international banking, while industrialists like Andrew Carnegie built enormous steel empires. John D. Rockefeller transformed the global oil industry, and Cornelius Vanderbilt created transportation networks that connected much of the United States. Their fortunes became so vast that newspapers around the world described them as the richest individuals of the modern age. Yet behind every great fortune stood thousands of engineers, factory workers, miners, sailors, railway builders, and craftsmen whose daily labor powered this extraordinary economic expansion. Industrialization also transformed ordinary life. Manufactured goods that had once been considered luxuries gradually became affordable for growing numbers of people. Clothing, furniture, tools, books, and household products could now be produced on a massive scale. Rising productivity created new jobs, encouraged innovation, and supported rapid population growth. At the same time, industrial cities often struggled with overcrowding, pollution, long working hours, and unsafe factory conditions. The remarkable growth of wealth brought new opportunities, but it also revealed that prosperity was rarely shared equally. While some families built extraordinary fortunes, many workers lived in difficult conditions despite helping create that wealth. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Industrial Revolution was that knowledge itself had become one of the world's most valuable resources. A successful invention could generate more wealth than a rich mine or a fertile kingdom. Creativity, engineering, science, and innovation increasingly determined economic success. Humanity had entered an age in which ideas could be just as valuable as physical resources. Wealth was no longer measured only by what people owned, but also by what they could imagine, invent, and build. The journey that had begun with a simple recognition of value had now evolved into a world where human ingenuity itself became one of history's greatest sources of prosperity. By the beginning of the 20th century, wealth had changed beyond recognition. For most of history, prosperity could be seen with the naked eye. It existed in fertile land, healthy livestock, warehouses filled with grain, fleets of merchant ships, or chests overflowing with gold and silver. Even during the Industrial Revolution, enormous fortunes were often measured by factories, railways, mines, and physical assets. But as the modern world developed, wealth gradually became less visible. Increasingly, it existed not in objects that people could touch, but in numbers recorded on paper, and, eventually, inside computers. One of the most significant changes was the growing use of paper money. Although paper currency had appeared centuries earlier in China, it became far more common around the world during the 19th and 20th centuries. Carrying large amounts of gold was no longer practical for expanding economies. Instead, governments and central banks issued banknotes representing value that people trusted and accepted in everyday life. Over time, many countries moved away from currencies backed directly by precious metals. The value of money depended increasingly on confidence in governments, financial institutions, and the strength of national economies. Once again, trust proved to be one of the most valuable resources humanity had ever created. banks also evolved rapidly, no longer simply protecting deposits or lending money to merchants. They became the heart of modern economies. Savings financed new businesses. Loans allowed families to buy homes and farmers to purchase equipment. Entrepreneurs borrowed capital to develop new technologies, while investors supported industries that continued reshaping the world. Every deposit placed inside a bank could eventually help finance another person's dream. Wealth was constantly moving, circulating through the economy instead of remaining locked inside vaults. The second half of the 20th century introduced another remarkable transformation. Plastic credit cards replaced large amounts of cash, allowing people to make purchases without carrying physical money. Later, computers connected banks across continents, making international transactions possible within minutes rather than weeks. The arrival of the internet accelerated this process even further. Online banking, electronic payments, and digital commerce gradually became ordinary parts of everyday life. Today, enormous fortunes can move across the globe in seconds without a single coin or banknote ever changing hands. Perhaps the greatest change has been the rise of knowledge as a form of wealth. Many of the world's most valuable companies own surprisingly few physical assets compared with the industrial giants of the past. Their greatest resources are software, ideas, patents, scientific discoveries, data, and human creativity. A successful invention, a groundbreaking technology, or a widely used digital platform can generate extraordinary prosperity without producing traditional goods. The modern economy increasingly rewards innovation rather than ownership of land or natural resources. In many ways, humanity has returned to an ancient truth first seen thousands of years ago. Ideas themselves possess immense value. Looking back across this remarkable journey, it becomes clear that wealth has never remained the same for long. It began with survival, grew through agriculture, expanded with trade, became easier to measure through money, multiplied through banking and investment, accelerated during the Industrial Revolution, and eventually entered the digital world, where much of it can no longer be seen at all. Yet despite every technological advance, one principle has remained unchanged since the earliest human communities gathered around rare stones and valuable tools. Wealth has always existed because people collectively believe that certain things hold value. The objects have changed. The systems have changed. Even money itself has changed. But the human search for prosperity continues, preparing us for one final question. After thousands of years of pursuing wealth, what has humanity truly been searching for all along? By the 20th century, wealth had traveled farther than anyone in the ancient world could have imagined. What had once been measured in baskets of grain, healthy livestock, or pieces of polished obsidian was now represented by paper banknotes, bank accounts, company shares, and numbers moving invisibly across financial networks. Yet despite these extraordinary changes, the idea behind wealth remained remarkably familiar. Humanity was still searching for security, opportunity, and a better future, just as our ancestors had done thousands of years earlier. The form of money continued to evolve. During China's Song dynasty in the 11th century, merchants became the first people in history to use government-issued paper money on a large scale. Carrying paper was far easier than transporting heavy strings of bronze coins across long trading routes. Several centuries later, Europe gradually adopted paper currency as commerce expanded. gold and silver remained valuable. But increasingly, people trusted printed notes because they represented something even more important than precious metal. They represented confidence. As economies became larger and more connected, governments realized that stable financial institutions were just as important as stable armies. In 1668, Sweden established the Sveriges Riksbank, widely recognized as the world's oldest surviving central bank. Only 26 years later, in 1694, the Bank of England was founded to help finance the British government and manage the nation's growing economy. These institutions did far more than protect money. They helped stabilize currencies, supported trade, and built confidence during times of uncertainty. Once again, trust proved to be one of the greatest forms of wealth humanity had ever created. Governments also searched for new ways to finance their expanding responsibilities. Although taxes had existed in many forms since ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, one of the first modern income taxes appeared in Britain in 1799 during the Napoleonic Wars. For the first time, citizens contributed a portion of their earnings, rather than paying only taxes on land or goods. The relationship between individuals, governments, and wealth had entered an entirely new chapter. During the 19th century, another important system emerged. Many countries gradually adopted the gold standard, linking the value of their currencies directly to a fixed amount of gold. International trade became more predictable because merchants trusted that currencies represented real reserves held by governments. For decades, this system supported one of the greatest periods of global economic expansion in history. Yet no financial system lasts forever. After the Second World War, representatives from 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in 1944 to design a new international monetary system capable of rebuilding a devastated world. Their agreement shaped global finance for decades. Finally, in 1971, US President Richard Nixon ended the direct convertibility of the US dollar into gold, bringing the era of the international gold standard to its conclusion. For the first time in history, the world's largest economies relied almost entirely on confidence rather than precious metals to support their currencies. Today, wealth moves around the planet in ways that earlier civilizations could never have imagined. Digital payments travel between continents in seconds. Businesses worth billions of dollars may own fewer physical assets than a 19th century factory. Software, scientific discoveries, patents, artificial intelligence, and human knowledge have become some of the most valuable resources on Earth. Once again, wealth has changed its appearance. Yet beneath every technological revolution lies the same invisible foundation that first appeared thousands of years ago. People continue assigning value to things they believe will improve their lives, protect their future, or help build a better tomorrow. Looking back across this remarkable journey, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Gold changed, money changed, banks changed, governments changed, even the definition of wealth changed. But the human desire to create value, preserve it, and pass it to the next generation has remained almost unchanged since the earliest communities first began gathering around objects they believed were worth more than others. And perhaps that realization brings us closer than ever to answering the question that has quietly guided our entire journey from the very beginning. At the beginning of our journey, we asked a simple question: how did wealth begin? After traveling across thousands of years of history, the answer is both simpler and more remarkable than it first appears. Wealth did not begin with gold. It did not begin with coins. It did not begin with kings, banks, companies, or stock markets. Those inventions transformed wealth, accelerated its growth, and changed the way it moved through civilizations, but none of them created it. To find the true beginning, we must travel much farther back, to a time before cities, before writing, and long before the first merchant ever opened a marketplace. Imagine once more those small communities living beside rivers, forests, and open plains. A hunter returns, carrying an unusually sharp piece of obsidian, gathered from a distant volcanic mountain. A farmer stores more grain than his family needs after a successful harvest. A skilled craftsperson creates a stronger tool than anyone has seen before. None of these people believe they are becoming wealthy. They are simply trying to survive, protect their families, and prepare for tomorrow. Yet something extraordinary is quietly taking place. For the first time, human beings begin agreeing that some things are worth more than others, not because nature declared it so, but because people believed it together. That quiet agreement changed everything. From it came exchange. From exchange came trade. Trade encouraged specialization. Specialization produced surplus. Surplus led to property. Property required money. Money gave rise to banks. Banks financed companies. Companies transformed industries. Industries built the modern world. Looking back, every chapter of this story can be traced to one remarkably simple human idea: value. Wealth was never hidden inside gold itself, nor inside a silver coin, a banknote, or a number displayed on a computer screen. Those were only tools. The true source of wealth has always been the value that human beings choose to create, recognize, and share with one another. History repeatedly reminds us of this truth. The kingdoms of Lydia eventually disappeared. The Roman Empire collapsed. The great merchant republics faded. Powerful trading companies rose and fell. Gold standards were abandoned. Paper money replaced precious metals, and digital transactions replaced paper. Every financial system changed because societies changed. Yet wealth survived every transformation because it was never defined by a particular object. It survived because people continued producing ideas, solving problems, building relationships, and creating things that others considered valuable. The form changed, but the principle remained the same. Perhaps that is why the history of wealth is also the history of civilization itself. Every major breakthrough we have explored, agriculture, trade, money, banking, investment, industry, and technology, was not an attempt to invent wealth from nothing. Each was simply another way of organizing, protecting, measuring, or expanding value that already existed. Humanity never stopped asking the same question in different forms. How can we create a better life? How can we leave something meaningful for those who come after us? How can today's effort become tomorrow's opportunity? The answers changed with every generation, but the questions never did. So, how did wealth begin? It began quietly, without celebration or ceremony. There was no single inventor, no defining moment, and no great announcement recorded in history. It emerged slowly as countless ordinary people made countless ordinary decisions over thousands of years. Every exchange built trust. Every harvest created security. Every invention opened new possibilities. Every generation added another small piece to a story much larger than itself. In the end, wealth was never simply about possessing more than someone else. It has always been about creating something that others find valuable. Long before there were fortunes, there was trust. Long before there were coins, there was cooperation. Long before there were banks, there was hope for a better tomorrow. And perhaps that has been the greatest form of wealth all along. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey through history. If you enjoyed this peaceful exploration, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps this channel continue creating long, relaxing history, documentaries, designed to help you unwind, learn something new, and gently drift off to sleep. If there is another historical mystery or forgotten civilization you would like to explore in a future episode, feel free to share your suggestion in the comments below. I always enjoy reading your ideas. And now, wherever you are in the world, I hope you can leave behind the noise of the day, slow your thoughts, and enjoy a peaceful night's rest. Thank you for spending this time with me. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next journey through history. Good night.